Imagine possessing a mind so fundamentally stable that no external event could disturb your inner peace. No criticism could shake your self-worth. No loss could destroy your sense of purpose, and no uncertainty could paralyze your decision-making. This isn't fantasy or wishful thinking. It's the documented reality of human beings who discovered and lived by principles that forged psychological invincibility. They weren't born with special gifts or blessed with perfect circumstances. They were ordinary people who learned extraordinary secrets about the architecture of an unshakable mind. Throughout history, there have been individuals who faced the absolute worst that existence could deliver and remained fundamentally unbroken. Marcus Aurelius governed a collapsing empire while plague devastated his people and enemies threatened his borders. Yet his private writings reveal a mind of serene clarity and unwavering purpose. Epictetus endured slavery, physical disability, and complete powerlessness over his external circumstances, yet developed teachings about inner freedom that have liberated millions of minds across centuries. Seneca navigated the deadly politics of imperial Rome, faced exile and financial ruin, and ultimately met execution with philosophical composure that astonished even his executioners. What these masters of mental fortitude discovered wasn't a collection of positive thinking techniques or temporary coping strategies, but immutable rules governing the operation of human consciousness itself. These rules, when understood and applied consistently, transform the mind from something that is constantly disturbed by external events into something that remains fundamentally stable regardless of circumstances. They create what the ancient philosophers called ataraxia, unshakable tranquility that exists independent of external conditions. Today we're going to explore 12 specific rules that these architects of inner strength discovered, rules so powerful that they can reshape your mental landscape from the ground up. These aren't suggestions or preferences, but laws of psychological functioning that operate whether you're conscious of them or not. The difference is that deliberate application of these rules puts you in partnership with the deepest patterns of human resilience, rather than fighting against them. And if this exploration of mental invincibility resonates with your own journey toward unshakable strength, I encourage you to subscribe and share in the comments which rule feels most transformative for your current circumstances. Your engagement helps these timeless insights reach others who might be struggling with mental volatility and seeking genuine stability. The first rule is the rule of absolute ownership, which states that you must take complete responsibility for your mental state, regardless of external circumstances or other people's behavior. This rule cuts directly against modern culture's tendency to blame external factors for internal experiences, but it represents the foundation of all psychological power. When you accept that your thoughts, emotions, and responses are ultimately your creation, you reclaim enormous control over your life experience. Most people live as if their mental state is determined by forces beyond their control. Other people's opinions, economic conditions, weather patterns, or political developments. The Stoics discovered that this perspective, while seemingly obvious, is actually a form of voluntary slavery. When you believe external events control your inner world, you become helpless whenever external events are unfavorable. You become dependent on circumstances being just right for you to feel peaceful, or confident, or purposeful. Epictetus, speaking from his experience of literal slavery, taught that no external force can disturb your mind without your permission. Someone insults you, and you feel hurt only if you choose to interpret their words as meaningful verdicts about your worth. Someone treats you unfairly, and you feel angry only if you choose to expect fair treatment from people who have never committed to providing it. Something unexpected happens, and you feel anxious only if you choose to interpret uncertainty as threatening rather than as the natural condition of existence. The practice of this rule involves catching yourself whenever you blame external circumstances for your internal experience and consciously reclaiming ownership. Instead of saying, "This situation is making me stressed," you might say, "I'm creating stress through my interpretation of this situation." Instead of "they're making me angry," you recognize, "I'm choosing anger as my response to their behavior." From this shift from external causation to internal responsibility doesn't eliminate difficult emotions, but it transforms you from victim to author of your experience. The second rule is the rule of impermanence acceptance, which requires deep recognition that everything external is temporary and that building your identity or happiness around temporary things creates inevitable suffering. This isn't pessimistic thinking, but realistic recognition of the fundamental nature of existence. Everything that can be gained can also be lost. Everything that appears solid is actually in constant flux, and everything you currently possess was once absent from your life and will someday be absent again. Marcus Aurelius spent considerable time contemplating the transient nature of all external goods: wealth, status, relationships, health, and even life itself. This wasn't morbid fascination, but practical preparation for maintaining equanimity, regardless of what life might take away. He understood that people who build their sense of security and identity around things that are inherently insecure and changeable set themselves up for inevitable devastation. This rule doesn't mean becoming indifferent to external goods or not working toward goals. It means holding these things lightly, appreciating them while they're present without becoming so attached that their loss would destroy your peace. When you truly accept impermanence, you can enjoy success without arrogance because you know it's temporary, and you can handle failure without despair because you know it's also temporary. The practical application involves regularly reminding yourself that everything you currently have was once absent and will someday be absent again. Your current job, your current health, your current relationships, your current circumstances, all of these are temporary arrangements that you can appreciate without depending on for your fundamental well-being. This practice creates what the Buddhists call non-attachment, full engagement with life without desperate clinging to any particular outcome. The third rule is the rule of present moment supremacy, which recognizes that all psychological power exists exclusively in the current moment, and that mental suffering always involves consciousness being displaced from present reality. This rule operates with mathematical precision. The more time your mind spends in past regrets or future anxieties, the less psychological resources you have available for responding effectively to actual current circumstances. Most mental disturbance involves consciousness time traveling away from the present moment. Anxiety is always about future events that haven't occurred and may never occur. Depression often involves ruminating about past events that are absolutely unchangeable. Regret rehashes decisions that can't be undone. Worry anticipates problems that may never materialize. All of these mental states involve using present moment energy to fight battles that exist only in memory or imagination. The Stoics discovered that the present moment always contains everything necessary to handle whatever is actually occurring right now. When you're fully present, you have access to all your intelligence, creativity, and resourcefulness. When your mind is scattered across past and future, you lose access to these capabilities exactly when you need them most. Present moment awareness isn't a luxury for people with easy lives. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to respond effectively to life's challenges. The practice involves developing the habit of noticing when your mind is psychologically time-traveling and gently returning attention to immediate sensory experience and available choices. When you catch yourself spiraling into worst-case scenarios about the future, you pause and ask, what's actually happening right now? What choices are actually available to me right now? When you find yourself rehearsing past mistakes, you redirect attention to current opportunities and decisions. The fourth rule is the rule of judgment sovereignty, which states that external events are inherently neutral and that all emotional disturbance comes from the meanings and judgments you assign to these events rather than from the events themselves. This rule is perhaps the most revolutionary insight of Stoic psychology because it reveals that you live not in an objective world, but in a world of your own interpretations, and those interpretations are entirely within your control. Consider two people experiencing identical circumstances. Both receive criticism from their supervisor at work. One person interprets this criticism as evidence of personal inadequacy, proof that they're failing at their career, and confirmation that they'll never succeed professionally. The other person interprets the same criticism as valuable feedback about specific behaviors, information about their supervisor's expectations, and an opportunity to improve their performance. The external event is identical. The emotional experience is completely different because the interpretations are different. Seneca taught that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, precisely because we add layers of meaning to neutral events that transform manageable circumstances into psychological catastrophes. Someone doesn't respond to your text message, and you create a story about rejection. A project doesn't succeed as planned, and you create a narrative about personal failure. Someone disagrees with your opinion, and you construct meaning about disrespect or attack. The practical application involves developing the habit of separating events from interpretations and consciously choosing meanings that serve your growth and well-being rather than automatically accepting the first interpretation that arises. When something disappointing happens, you might ask, what else could this mean? How might my future self thank me for how I choose to interpret this situation? What meaning would the wisest person I know assign to these circumstances? The fifth rule is the rule of virtue primacy, which establishes that excellence of character is the only good that can never be taken away and is therefore the only reliable foundation for lasting peace and self-respect. This rule challenges almost everything modern culture teaches about success and happiness, but it provides the only genuinely stable foundation for psychological well-being. Most people build their sense of worth and satisfaction around external achievements, career success, financial accumulation, social approval, physical attractiveness, or competitive victories. The Stoics discovered that this approach creates inevitable suffering because all external goods are temporary and beyond ultimate control. You can work brilliantly and still face economic downturns. You can treat people well and still encounter ungrateful individuals. You can maintain excellent health habits and still develop serious illnesses. Virtue, however, operates according to completely different principles. Your commitment to honesty remains available regardless of whether others are honest with you. Your capacity for courage grows stronger through every challenge you face with integrity. Your practice of justice continues to be possible regardless of how unjustly you might be treated. Your pursuit of wisdom deepens through every experience, pleasant or difficult. When you anchor your self-respect in character development rather than external achievements, you build a foundation that cannot be shaken by circumstances. This doesn't mean being indifferent to outcomes or not pursuing goals. It means deriving your sense of worth from the quality of effort and intention you bring to your endeavors, rather than from whether those endeavors produce the results you hope for. The sixth rule is the rule of obstacle integration, which teaches that impediments to your plans are not interruptions to your development, but the very means through which development occurs. This rule completely transforms your relationship with difficulty from resistance to appreciation, from seeing challenges as proof that life is working against you, to recognizing them as life working for your growth. Marcus Aurelius expressed this principle when he wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. He understood that obstacles don't prevent progress, they redirect progress into forms that comfortable circumstances would never produce. The rejection that forces you to develop better skills, the loss that teaches you what truly matters, the criticism that reveals blind spots you need to address, the setback that redirects you toward opportunities better aligned with your authentic nature. This rule doesn't suggest that all suffering has meaning or that you should seek out unnecessary difficulties. It recognizes that when challenges are unavoidable, conscious engagement with them often produces capabilities, wisdom, and strength that ease living would never develop. Every person you admire for their resilience, wisdom, or character has been forged by experiences that were difficult at the time, but invaluable in retrospect. The practice involves shifting your automatic response to obstacles from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "How might this serve my development?" Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence that you're on the wrong path, you begin recognizing them as information about what adjustments might be needed. Instead of viewing challenges as personal persecution, you start seeing them as universally distributed opportunities for growth that happen to be arriving in your particular life. The seventh rule is the rule of death consciousness, which involves maintaining regular awareness of mortality, not to create morbidity, but to intensify appreciation and clarify priorities. The Stoics understood that death is not the opposite of life, but the context that gives life meaning, urgency, and preciousness. When you remember that your time is limited, everything becomes more vivid and significant. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced memento mori, remembering death, not to become depressed about life's brevity, but to prevent taking any moment for granted. When you truly internalize that this conversation might be your last with someone you love, that this experience of beauty might be unrepeatable, that this opportunity for service might not come again, everything becomes infused with meaning and importance. Death consciousness also provides a unique form of courage. When you've genuinely accepted the inevitability of your own mortality, many fears lose their grip on you. The fear of embarrassment becomes insignificant when measured against the fear of never having tried. The fear of rejection pales beside the fear of never having been authentic. The fear of failure diminishes when compared to the fear of never having lived fully. This practice doesn't involve dwelling on death obsessively, but periodically reflecting on the temporary nature of your existence and using that awareness to guide your choices. Are you spending your precious time on activities that truly matter to you? Are you expressing love and appreciation to the people who enrich your life? Are you pursuing goals that align with your deepest values rather than merely social expectations? The eighth rule is the rule of universal connection, which recognizes that individual peace and purpose are found through understanding your place within the larger patterns and purposes of existence. The Stoics taught that humans are not isolated individuals competing against a hostile universe, but integral parts of a vast, interconnected system that operates according to rational principles. This rule suggests that much of modern psychological suffering comes from feeling separate from and opposed to the natural world, other people, and the larger cosmos. When you understand yourself as part of the universal community, your individual challenges become part of a larger story of consciousness, learning to navigate existence with wisdom and grace. Your personal struggles contribute to the collective human experiment in discovering how to live well. This cosmic perspective doesn't diminish the importance of your individual life. It enlarges it by connecting it to purposes greater than personal comfort or achievement. When you see yourself as part of the larger human family working out the same fundamental questions about meaning, love, and wisdom, your individual difficulties become less personally devastating and more universally meaningful. The practice involves regularly contemplating your connection to the larger whole of which you are a part. You might reflect on how your breath connects you to all breathing beings, how your thoughts participate in the larger human conversation about existence, or how your choices contribute to the collective human experiment in conscious living. This perspective often provides comfort during difficult times and direction when you feel lost or purposeless. The ninth rule is the rule of emotional alchemy, which teaches that difficult emotions can be transformed into wisdom, strength, and compassion, rather than simply endured or suppressed. This rule recognizes that challenging emotions often contain valuable information about your values, needs, and areas for growth, and that conscious engagement with these emotions can produce insights that pleasant experiences would never provide. The Stoics didn't view difficult emotions as problems to be eliminated, but as raw materials to be refined through philosophical practice. Anger can be alchemized into clarity about your boundaries and values. Fear can be transformed into prudent preparation and deeper self-knowledge. Sadness can be refined into appreciation for what you've loved and lost. Frustration can be converted into motivation for necessary changes. This alchemical process requires a fundamentally different approach to challenging emotions than either suppression or indulgence. Instead of pushing emotions away or being consumed by them, you work with them as a craftsperson works with raw materials. You ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me about what matters to me? How might this feeling be serving my understanding? What wisdom is embedded in this difficult experience? Seneca wrote extensively about his own emotional struggles not as failures to be ashamed of, but as opportunities to deepen his philosophical practice. He discovered that the emotions he initially wanted to eliminate often contained crucial information about his attachments, expectations, or areas where he needed to develop greater wisdom or strength. The 10th rule is the rule of response mastery, which states that while you cannot control what happens to you, you always retain complete authority over how you respond to what happens to you. This rule represents perhaps the most empowering discovery in human psychology. No matter how powerless you might be over external circumstances, you always possess total sovereignty over your internal responses. This rule transforms your relationship with adversity from victimhood to authorship. Instead of feeling helpless because you can't control events, you feel powerful because you can always control your reactions to events. Instead of focusing on how unfair or difficult your circumstances are, you focus on what kind of person you want to become through your response to these circumstances. The Stoics observed that every external event, no matter how challenging, presents an opportunity to practice virtue. You can't control whether people treat you with respect, but you can choose to respond with dignity. You can't control whether your efforts produce the results you hope for, but you can choose to bring excellence to your efforts. You can't control whether life feels fair, but you can choose to respond with wisdom rather than bitterness. This response mastery becomes the foundation of genuine freedom. When you realize that your character, your peace, and your sense of purpose depend entirely on choices that remain available to you regardless of circumstances, you become truly free. External events can influence your situation, but never your soul, can change your circumstances, but never your capacity for virtue. The 11th rule is the rule of rational discrimination, which involves developing the ability to distinguish between what deserves your mental energy and what should be dismissed as unworthy of attention. Just as you wouldn't consume toxic food or live in polluted environments, the Stoics understood that consuming toxic thoughts or dwelling on destructive mental patterns degrades your psychological health and effectiveness. Not every thought that arises in consciousness deserves careful consideration. Not every worry merits detailed analysis. Not every opinion others hold about you requires your response. Not every injustice in the world demands your emotional investment. Learning to discriminate between mental content that serves your growth and content that merely creates disturbance is essential for maintaining psychological clarity and peace. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself not to waste energy on things that didn't contribute to his character development or his ability to serve others effectively. He developed the habit of asking whether particular thoughts or concerns were worthy of occupying space in the mind of someone committed to living virtuously and purposefully. The practice involves developing internal criteria for determining which mental content deserves your attention and which should be recognized and dismissed without elaborate processing. You might ask, does engaging with this thought serve my growth or well-being? Will focusing on this concern lead to productive action or merely create more disturbance? Is this mental pattern moving me toward or away from the person I want to become? The 12th and final rule is the rule of philosophical perspective, which involves regularly stepping back from immediate circumstances to view your life within larger contexts of time, meaning, and universal human experience. This rule prevents you from becoming so absorbed in current challenges that you lose sight of broader patterns and purposes that might not be visible from inside the intensity of immediate experience. The Stoics regularly practiced exercises in expanding perspective. They would contemplate how their current difficulties compared to the vast sweep of human history, how their individual problems fit within the larger patterns of natural change and development, and how their temporary troubles might contribute to their long-term character development. This expanded perspective doesn't minimize genuine difficulties or suggest that problems don't matter. Instead, it provides context that prevents you from becoming overwhelmed by challenges that feel insurmountable when viewed through the narrow lens of immediate experience. When you can see your current struggles as part of the larger human story of learning to live wisely, they often become more manageable and meaningful. The practice might involve asking yourself questions like, how will I view this situation in 10 years? What would someone I deeply respect advise about this challenge? How might this difficulty be contributing to my development in ways I can't currently see? What would handling this situation with wisdom and grace look like? When you integrate these 12 rules into your daily thinking and living, something extraordinary happens. You develop what the Stoics called the sage mind, a form of consciousness so fundamentally stable that external circumstances become largely irrelevant to your inner state. This doesn't make you invulnerable to all emotional responses or immune to caring about outcomes, but it does make you someone who remains essentially unshakable, regardless of what life delivers. This transformation occurs because these rules address the deepest patterns governing human psychological experience. They don't fight against the nature of consciousness, but work in partnership with its fundamental operations. They don't try to eliminate the human elements of your experience, but provide a framework for navigating those elements with wisdom rather than reactivity. The mind shaped by these rules becomes antifragile, not just resistant to stress and challenge, but actually strengthened by appropriate amounts of difficulty. Setbacks become information rather than devastation. Criticism becomes feedback rather than attack. Uncertainty becomes opportunity rather than threat. Loss becomes reminder of impermanence rather than proof of victimization. This unshakable quality doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or indifferent to life's beauty and meaning. Often, people who develop this kind of mental stability become more emotionally alive and more deeply engaged with life because they're not constantly defending against potential difficulties. When you're not scared of being shaken, you can allow yourself to be moved by beauty, love, and purpose. These rules work by changing your fundamental relationship with existence from fragility to antifragility, from defensiveness to openness, from reactivity to responsiveness. They transform you from someone who needs perfect circumstances to feel peaceful into someone who can maintain essential stability regardless of circumstances. They make you someone who can be challenged but never truly defeated, who can be wounded but never fundamentally broken. The beautiful paradox of developing an unshakable mind is that as you become less dependent on external conditions for your well-being, you often become more effective at creating positive external conditions. When you're not desperate for particular outcomes, you make better decisions. When you're not controlled by fear of failure, you take more intelligent risks. When you're not seeking validation, you express your authentic gifts more freely. Living according to these rules means waking up each morning knowing that whatever the day brings, you possess everything necessary to handle it with dignity, wisdom, and grace. Not because you can control outcomes, but because you understand that your essential strength and peace exist independently of any particular outcome. Not because you're guaranteed success, but because you know that your character and worth are developed through how you handle both success and failure. The world will continue to present challenges, uncertainties, losses, and difficulties. That's the nature of existence in a universe governed by change and impermanence. But when you understand and embody these 12 rules, you discover what the ancient Stoics knew. There exists within you something that cannot be shaken by external circumstances, something that grows stronger through adversity, something that remains free and purposeful, even when everything around you seems to be in chaos. What would your life look like if you possessed complete confidence in your mental unshakability? What dreams would you pursue? What risks would you take? What love would you offer? What service would you provide if you knew that your essential peace and strength could never be destroyed by external events? These aren't hypothetical questions, but invitations to discover the profound freedom that becomes available when you stop trying to control life and start building the inner resources to remain unshakable no matter what life brings to your door.